I'm 37, happily married, and a mom to 3 wonderful kids. An 8-year-old boy, a 5-year-old girl, and a 3-year-old boy. From the outside, we probably look like a pretty typical family, but the truth is, our situation is more complicated than most people realize. My daughter isn't my husband's biological child. She was conceived when I was sexually assaulted. At the time, my husband and I were actively trying to get pregnant, so I wasn't on birth control. When I found out I was pregnant, I had no idea if the baby was my husband's or the result of the assault. It was a devastating time, filled with fear and uncertainty. We got a paternity test during the pregnancy, followed by another one after our daughter was born, just to be sure. Both confirmed the truth that we already suspected: she wasn't biologically my husband's. The hardest part of it all was telling my husband. I knew how much he wanted to start a family, and I was terrified that this would tear us apart. But he was incredible. He didn't flinch when I told him. From the moment I found out, he made it clear that it didn't matter to him. He loved me, and he would love the child no matter what. And he's been true to his word ever since. He's stepped up in every way possible. He coaches our daughter's soccer team and spends special one-on-one time with her. They're incredibly close. She looks up to him, asks for his advice about everything, and prefers hanging out with him over me most days. Honestly, I don't mind one bit. It makes me so happy to see how much she loves him and how strong their bond is. There's no question in my mind that she'll always feel secure in his love for her, no matter what the biology says. Both of our families know the truth about my daughter's biological father. It wasn't something we could keep hidden. There was a trial, and the man who assaulted me was convicted, so the circumstances surrounding my daughter's conception were public knowledge, at least within our families. I was lucky in that my husband's family has been nothing but supportive. They never treated my daughter any differently from our boys. In fact, she's the only granddaughter on my husband's side of the family, and if anything, she gets a little extra attention because of it. My initial fear was that my husband's family would have a harder time accepting her, given that there's no genetic connection, but I couldn't have been more wrong. They love her, and she's an integral part of their family. My side of the family, however, hasn't handled things as well. My parents love my daughter, but my father especially struggled with the situation in the beginning. For about the first year of her life, my dad would get teary-eyed whenever he looked at or held her. I confronted him about it once, and he admitted that when he looked at her, all he could see was the man who assaulted me. I was furious. My daughter is a blameless, innocent child, and the fact that he could project something so awful onto her hurt me deeply. I told my parents that they couldn't be around my kids if they were going to treat my daughter any differently from her brothers. To his credit, my dad got therapy and worked through his feelings, and he's much better now. They have a good relationship, and he no longer seems to harbor those feelings when he's with her. But a part of me will never forget how he acted when she was just a baby. I still don't understand how anyone could look at her and see anything other than a child who looks, acts, and speaks just like me. Despite my dad's progress, my parents don't agree with how my husband and I have chosen to handle things with our daughter. The biggest point of contention is that we haven't told her the truth about her biological father yet. None of our kids know. My husband and I have decided that we want to tell her before she turns 18, but we think she's far too young to know right now. She's only 5. She's a happy, sensitive, curious little girl, and we want her to feel completely secure in herself and her relationship with her dad before we drop this heavy truth on her. I've spent a lot of time thinking about how and when to tell her. I'm still not entirely sure what the best approach will be. It's something I want to talk more about with my husband and a therapist before we make any decisions. I'm torn between 2 approaches. On one hand, I could tell her that she has a different biological dad from her brothers and leave it at that, saving the details about the assault for when she's older. On the other hand, I could tell her everything at once in age-appropriate language, ripping off the band-aid, so to speak. A lot depends on how old she is when we tell her. My instinct is to be as honest as possible from the start. I never want her to think that I was unfaithful to her dad or that her conception was something shameful that we had to hide. I also don't want her to try to contact the man or his family, given the circumstances. Yesterday, my mom invited me over for tea, and the conversation took an unexpected turn. Out of nowhere, she told me that she thinks my husband and I are doing our daughter a disservice by not being honest with her about her biology now. I explained that we plan to tell her in the next few years, but right now, she's still too young. My mom disagreed. She said it was a huge mistake to keep this secret from her and that we were only setting ourselves up for a worse outcome later. My mom's main concern is that our daughter could accidentally find out the truth from someone else. She could hear it from a relative, or maybe one of her biological father's relatives might reach out someday. Or she could discover it through one of those genetic testing websites. My mom thinks that the longer we keep it from her, the harder it will be when she eventually learns the truth. She fears that our daughter will feel ashamed because her biological father is a rapist, or worse, that she'll think we're ashamed of the truth because we kept it hidden for so long. I snapped a bit when my mom said that. I reminded her that the only person who's ever treated my daughter differently because of her genetics was my father. I also told her that I want my daughter to feel secure in herself and her relationship with her dad before we burden her with this information. I don't plan on waiting until she's an adult, but I firmly believe that 5 is too young to talk about something so heavy. My mom didn't take my response well. She's upset with me, and she thinks I'm failing my daughter by not telling her the truth sooner. I've been wrestling with this ever since. Before my mom said anything, I felt confident that my husband and I were handling this the best way we could. But now I'm starting to doubt myself. What if my mom is right? What if keeping this secret does more harm than good? I love my daughter more than anything, and the last thing I want to do is hurt her. I called my mother-in-law in tears, unsure of what to do next. She's been so supportive through all of this and immediately made an appointment for my husband and me to speak with a child psychologist next week. I'm hoping the psychologist can help us navigate this, but I'd also appreciate other perspectives. Am I doing the right thing by waiting to tell my daughter the truth? Or am I setting her up for heartbreak and confusion later on? I keep replaying the conversation with my mom in my head. She thinks that by keeping this secret, we're somehow telling my daughter that there's something shameful about her conception. But that's not it at all. I don't want to hide the truth from her forever. I just don't think she's ready to understand it yet. She's still so little, and she's happy. She has a wonderful relationship with her dad, and I don't want to disrupt that before she's mature enough to process what it all means. My fear is that if we tell her too soon, she'll feel confused or scared, or worse, she'll think that the way she was conceived defines her in some way. I don't ever want her to feel like she's different from her brothers or like there's something wrong with her because of how she came into the world. But I also don't want her to feel betrayed by us later on. If she finds out the truth from someone else, or if she stumbles upon it on her own, it could devastate her. The last thing I want is for her to feel like we lied to her or kept something important from her. I want her to trust us, and I want to be the one to tell her when the time is right. But when is the right time? That's the question I keep coming back to, and I don't have an answer yet. I feel like I'm walking a tightrope, trying to balance my daughter's happiness and security with the weight of this secret. I don't want to burden her with something she's not ready to understand, but I also don't want to wait so long that it feels like a betrayal when she finds out. My husband and I have always been open and honest with our kids, but this is different. This isn't just any truth, it's a truth that could change the way she sees herself and the world around her. In the end, all I want is to do what's best for my daughter. I want her to grow up feeling loved and secure, knowing that her dad and I are always there for her.
I was married to Tom for 8 years, and during that time, we had 2 beautiful sons, Roger, who was 6 at the time, and Carl, who was 2 when he died. Carl's death is something I'll never fully be able to put into words. There's no way to describe the kind of pain that comes from losing a child, especially in the way that I lost Carl. It wasn't an illness, an accident at home, or some sudden, unforeseeable tragedy. It was a senseless accident that ripped my life apart in a matter of hours. It was a day like any other. I had left for work, thinking everything was fine. Roger and Carl were with Tom's brother, Mark, who was supposed to be watching them for the afternoon. I don't know the full details of what happened that day, and honestly, I've never asked for them. What I do know is that Mark somehow ran Carl over with his car. My sweet, innocent boy was just playing in the driveway, and Mark didn't see him. Carl died right there. I went to work with 2 sons, and by the time I came home, I only had 1. I was heartbroken in a way that's hard to explain. It's not the kind of heartbreak that heals with time. It's more like a permanent scar that you carry with you forever. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think, I couldn't function for weeks after Carl's death. Tom was devastated, too, of course. We were both shattered, but instead of bringing us together, Carl's death tore us apart. In the immediate aftermath of Carl's death, all I wanted was to cut Mark out of our lives completely. I didn't trust him around Roger, and I certainly didn't want to see him or hear from him ever again. But Tom didn't see it that way. He insisted that it was an accident. Mark had already exiled himself. He moved out of state to give everyone space, and Tom couldn't bring himself to hate his brother forever. He told me he couldn't lose his brother on top of losing his son. That's when I knew we were done. I couldn't look at Tom without seeing the man who, in my eyes, chose to protect his brother instead of fully grieving our son with me. I told him that if he wanted to choose Carl's murderer over me, then that was his choice, but I wouldn't be a part of it. That might sound harsh, and maybe it is, but I was in so much pain that I couldn't see things any other way. As far as I was concerned, Mark killed my child, and Tom was willing to forgive him for it. That wasn't something I could live with. We divorced not long after. Tom didn't want the divorce. He begged me to reconsider, mostly for Roger's sake, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. I couldn't be with someone who didn't feel the same level of anger and betrayal that I did. I couldn't love him the way I once had, not after what happened. We ended up agreeing on a 75-25 custody split because I had more financial stability, but even after the legalities were settled, I cut Tom off as much as possible. We only communicated through the parenting app, and outside of events for Roger, I didn't want to talk to him or see him. Tom kept trying to reach out over the next couple of years. He sent messages apologizing, begging me to forgive him, telling me that he couldn't lose me as his best friend on top of everything else. But I ignored him. I didn't want to hear his apologies. I didn't want his explanations. All I saw when I looked at him was the man who chose to protect his brother instead of standing by me. It's been 2 years since Carl died, and I'm still struggling to move on. I go to therapy. I drown myself in work and in taking care of Roger. I do everything I can to keep my mind busy, but the grief is always there, just beneath the surface. There are moments, like when I see Roger playing or laughing, that I'm reminded of how much Carl would have grown, how much he would have changed. Those thoughts hit me like a punch in the gut every time. Last night, something unexpected happened. Tom called me out of the blue. I assumed something was wrong with Roger since it was his night with Tom, but when I answered, all I heard was Tom crying. I don't know why, but for some reason, I didn't hang up right away like I normally would have. I let him cry. I sat there, listening to him sob on the other end of the line, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't immediately shut him out. Eventually, Tom started talking. He asked me to forgive him. I told him that I couldn't, not when he had been so quick to dismiss Carl's death, to move on and forgive Mark. He told me that losing Carl had been so overwhelming that he couldn't bear the thought of losing his brother, too. He said that Mark was a part of him, and he couldn't let go of that last piece of his old life. I told him that was fine for him, but that didn't mean I had to be fine with it. I didn't care if it was an accident. My child was dead because Mark had been negligent. If the situation had been reversed, if I had run over Mark's child, I doubted Tom's family would have been so quick to forgive me. We went back and forth for a while, both of us trying to make the other understand our point of view, but in the end, we were at an impasse. At one point, Tom asked me if I still loved him. That question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about love in a long time. I told him the truth. I did still love him, but I couldn't stand to be around him anymore. The love was there, but it was buried under layers of anger and resentment, and I didn't know how to untangle it. Then he asked if we could at least be friends again. He said that despite everything that had happened, he just wanted me back in his life in some capacity, even if it was only as friends. That's when I told him something that might make me the asshole. I told him that I'd be friends with him again when Carl comes back to life. Until then, our relationship would stay as it was, distant and cold. After I said that, I hung up. I didn't think much of it at the time. It felt like the truth. How could I be friends with someone who had forgiven the person responsible for my child's death? But since then, Tom's family has been harassing me, particularly his mother. She's been sending me messages, calling me a witch and telling me I'll burn in hell for what I said. I've been responding by telling her that her son is a murderer, so I guess we'll both be burning in hell together. I know that's not productive, but I'm so filled with anger and grief that I can't seem to stop myself. Now, I'm starting to feel lost. On one hand, I still believe that I was right to cut Tom and his family off after Carl's death. They rallied around Mark, and I couldn't stand to be a part of that. But on the other hand, I wonder if I'm being too harsh. Tom didn't kill Carl, he lost a son, too. He's grieving in his own way, and maybe I've been punishing him for something that wasn't entirely his fault. But then again, how can I forgive him for forgiving Mark? I've been sitting with this feeling of loss for so long that I don't know how to move forward. I don't know if I even want to. The idea of forgiving Tom feels impossible, but the idea of holding onto this anger forever doesn't seem like a solution, either. I feel like I'm stuck in a loop of grief, anger, and isolation, and I don't know how to break free from it. Carl's death was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and I'm not sure I'll ever be able to fully heal from it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive Tom or Mark, and I don't know if I even want to try. But I do know that this pain is consuming me, and I need to find a way to keep going for Roger's sake. He's still here, and he deserves a mother who isn't drowning in anger and grief. Am I the asshole for telling Tom that I'll only be friends with him when Carl comes back to life? Maybe, but right now, it feels like the only way I can protect myself from the overwhelming pain of losing my child and the betrayal I felt when Tom chose to forgive Mark. I don't know what the future holds, but for now, this is where I stand.